How does it feel to treat me like you do when you rail for me and show who you are? Hello, folks. Just getting set up for Adam Roberts Backus. Waiting for him to join me. What up, homie?
Nothing, man. Just walking around.
Walking
Yeah.
around in what it looks exactly like the Salt Flats in Salt Lake City.
I don't even know how that's on there. I didn't do that.
It's cool though.
Last time it was the Northern Lights.
How do you choose virtual background? I'm gonna look for something here, and I'm gonna go with
Here, because we're heading west.
that's true.
I have a limited because I don't have like a paid version of Zoom, so I have limited backgrounds I can do.
I wonder where that I'm looking for it right now. Oh boy. Um
Yeah, I have this, the beach, the Northern Lights, and then the Earth, and some blades of grass. Keep it with the Golden Gate Bridge because we're going to California.
that's true. That's true. You're right. You're right. Going to California with an aching in my heart.
There's a girl out there with love in her, something in her hair. God,
That's
that's
right.
that's my favorite Zeppelin song too. I know the lyrics to that. I just can't sing them right now.
All right. I'm gonna
Can you hear me?
record. Yeah, I can.
What? Okay.
I'm gonna record the song thing that I was gonna do in the beginning. So I'll cue you in when it goes to me and you talking in the start of the episode. But I also got to get my Gmail pulled up here with my Google Doc. Um,
My window's over too. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that PDF you sent me. That's it's like all
CIA.
yeah, the only way I can see it is if I highlight everything. There's like a black box over the
I think it's because there was something that I copy pasted and it was off of a website that I wanted to remember.
mm,
And I think because some of the stuff that I found for this episode um was stuff that like I there we go. I got it. All right. Some of it was like older websites and there was good info. I just didn't know. Um, I was lazy. So I copy pasted that shit. Some of it. Let me see here. That song. It's
Hello, stranger, can you tell us where you've been? More importantly, however did you come to be here? Though a stranger, you can rest here for a while. But save your energy, your journey here is far from over. Come the sunrise, we'll descend through Judgment Valley. And weigh our worth before her majesty, the verdant river. No direction but to follow what you know. No direction but a faith in her decision. No direction but to never fight her flow. No direction but to trust the final destination. You're a stranger till she whispers you can stay. You're a stranger till she whispers that your journey's over. Where you were before, majesty, the Verde River. Where you
might have to add it later. My bad. What happens with the buttons?
Yeah, I couldn't hear what you were saying.
I was saying. All right. Welcome to the Zanzizi podcast, Raddad 2023. We've got our background of old New York, or not old New York, old California. Man, I'm all off today.
Uh, yeah, we don't have Golden Gate Bridge in New York.
What do you mean, man? It must be because I'm joined with DangerZone on the interwebs. If you want to watch along, you can see our faces. We got DZ over there representing with a Zanzizi shirt, which you can purchase through our Instagram. Hell yeah. Hell to the yeah, my brother.
Oh wait, I don't think the Zoom unless I make the microphone.
No, it looks good. Don't mess with don't mess with anything.
No, you know how the camera it only highlights you if you're speaking the way it's posted on YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
So I had to talk and say something to
Well,
advertise.
I have it set up so you can see both at the same time now.
Oh, do you? Okay.
We're slowly I have a better webcam too. I don't know if you noticed that, but it's a little better.
Yeah.
We're upgrading slowly as we go along, folks. But we are already in our spooktobular month, which means we're covering if you know me in Danger Zone, we're going deep history here, folks. Which means Red Dead, what are we gonna cover? Well, you've already seen the title of the episode, so you know Donner Party, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. It's gonna get intense. It's gonna get frontier like. It's gonna get intense. two intenses right there, because look, this is a time when things weren't easy. But before we get into that, before we get into the preamble and the info and all that stuff, I want to ask you, Adam, because this is your first time on a Spooktober episode.
Oh boy.
What kinds of stuff do you like to do for around this time? Are you a big horror guy? Are you big, celebrator of Halloween?
Yes, I Danielle mistakenly said that Halloween was my favorite holiday or time of year the other day. It's close. It's probably the second or third. I like Thanksgiving, obviously Christmas, but Thanksgiving's probably my favorite holiday of the year. But I love Halloween. I've always liked to, get in costumes and, go around, get candy, spook people. As the older I got, when I was in high school, I used to get all goblined up and, give out candy at the house. And, I would love to like spook the kids, but that's all gone living up here in the sticks. We don't have any neighbors. Got to go downtown or something through the neighborhood. We take Xander, but we like Halloween around here. We try to do movies, like a couple movie nights per week during October, doing like scary movies.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, usually we'll do, I don't know, 10 maybe throughout the month. But I told Danielle yesterday, I said, we got to get on their spooky movie thing because it's already the 5th and we haven't even watched one yet. I've been watching movies myself, but not spooky ones.
Yeah, no, so full disclosure, this month we're doing an episode on the Wineville chicken coop murders, and I've been reading that book because I finished today's main source, The Indifferent Stars Above by Daniel James Brown, and immediately thought I would read a book about heinous murder and following a book about frontiersmen turned cannibals, and it's been an interesting book reading period, but there's a movie based on the next subject, so I've been kind of floundering a little bit on my monthly, not even monthly, but like say spooky movie fest. We are rewatching The Haunting of Hill House for an episode towards the end of the month, so I've seen it like 7 or 8 times. I truly believe the first season of Netflix's The Haunting of Hill House is the best ghost story I've ever seen or read of all time. Such a fucking amazing show.
I think you told me about that, but I've never watched it. I don't think I've watched it.
You and Danielle would love it.
Yeah.
Especially Danielle, I think, because the characters are very relatable.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I watched it real quick while we're on movies. I watched 2 movies this week that I hadn't seen before. One, which is eerily similar, sort of similar to this whole story, called Snowpiercer. Have you seen that?
Yeah. That's on a train, right?
Yeah, it's on a train, like post-apocalyptic, but it's all snow and like the rear train car, like he talks about how they had to eat each other to survive. So like the snow and the cannibalism part of that kind of was funny because I didn't expect that going into the movie. But last night, and I'm not going to ruin it for any of your listeners or even you haven't seen it, but Old Henry, really good friggin' movie, dude, and the acting is phenomenal. I was looking for something to watch the other night and it looked it up on Rotten Tomatoes. It's got 95 on Rotten Tomatoes and it was on the Roku channel.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it totally like independent movie. I didn't really know what it was about, but I watched it last night, dude. It's about an hour and 45 minutes. Dude, watch that movie. It's really cool. It takes place in 1906,
I'm
like
there.
Oklahoma territory.
Ooh.
It's just a farmer and his boy, and all this drama comes, onto the farm, and they live out in the middle of nowhere, and the acting is really good. I forget the two main guys there, but actually there's 3, but yeah, it was a really good movie. Check it out. Old
Sweet.
Henry.
Old Henry, Haunting of Hill House. You got your homework, listeners. All right, we're gonna get into it. Donner Party, or AKA the 1846 Family Road Trip from Hell. Now, I mentioned The Indifferent Stars Above by Daniel James Brown. That is our main source for this episode. I finished the book on Audible. It's about 10 hour and change. I think if you have the time, I highly recommend it. It's probably the best book I've ever read on frontier life, especially because they have in the hard copy of the book, they have like wagon manifests. So if you want to see like the details on things like that and like what they had to get into, because it's truly a harrowing thing. I mean, not just in the idea of travel, because yeah, like maps, we didn't look. Here's the thing: we didn't have MapQuest, we didn't have OnStar, we didn't have Siri, we didn't have Starbucks or Speedway. Things were a lot of it was like word of mouth, and we're going to get a lot into the word of mouth stuff, but it was scary. And not only that, but like the frontier is like 10 feet tall, like thick brush. And you'd have these instances where like a kid could just wander off, and then you'd be like, where the hell's my kid? And then you never find them because they get swallowed by the forest or sniped by an Indian, or God forbid they get bit by some sort of wild animal, because not like medicine was that great either. But other than Indifferent Stars Above, there's a really great American Experience on the Donner Party on YouTube for free. And there's a few other, I mean, obviously Last Podcast has done a 2-part series on this. That's excellent. But we're talking pre-Civil War era here, folks. I mean, this is the Oregon Trail era, if you will. And you're thinking, Raddad, isn't that a video game? Yes, little Chad and little Karen, it is. In fact, I played it in middle school, all 8 bits, neon green, on a little monitor in a small town Michigan computer class. But if you want to be real, let me break down, before we get into this, the Oregon Trail, because there were some facts I didn't know. Most of us were raised on the video game, so the idea of folks traveling west and that kind of probably sprung up in most people's imagination. But the Oregon Trail was a 2,170-mile east-west large-wheeled wagon route and emigrant trail in the U.S. that connected the Missouri River to valleys in Oregon. The eastern part of the Oregon Trail spanned part of what is now the state of Kansas and nearly all of what are now the states of Nebraska and Wyoming. Have you ever been out that way?
Yeah, I've driven through, well, the Great Plains, like Wyoming, Nebraska, and stuff like that. I actually drove through with Dane when he moved out to Virginia to live with me.
Oh, wow.
I flew out to San Francisco, and then we went up to Sacramento, and then we took I-80 across, which basically I looked up all the maps and everything for the Donner Park. It goes right through Truckee Lake and where this whole thing happened.
Well,
And then
Truckee Lake is now Donner Lake, isn't it?
yeah, Donner Lake, but it's
But
all right there. It's just north of Lake Tahoe, and I-80 runs right through there and then hits Reno, and then goes up and through Utah, Salt Lake City, and then it goes up into the the southwest corner of Wyoming and across. And it's basically the route that they took, minus that part, and we'll get to that.
no, I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, I'd be curious to see what it looked like now. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I took pictures and videos and stuff driving across. It's so beautiful, and going through the Sierra Nevadas. I mean, for us it was September, so there was no snow, but man, I couldn't imagine trying to navigate that and horse and buggy, or wagon and cattle and all this stuff. Just tough
No,
terrain.
yeah, I mean, when we'll get into that, it's not easy, and that's for sure. Um, free land was the main reason that people went out out to the Oregon Territory. They were trying to claim it for the U.S. because the rich farmlands of Oregon drew thousands of settlers. The land was free to those who could make it to the Oregon Territory. People were farming on marginal lands in Indiana, Illinois, and Missouri, and found the lure of rich farmland in the Willamette Valley irresistible. Also, the British, Russians, and Americans all claimed the Oregon Territory. I don't know what Russia thinks. Like,
I saw that in your notes. Now I said, what?
yeah, I know.
How are they even down that area at that point? That's a long way. I mean,
this would be during like a stage where they still had some sort of like a monarchy. And I mean, look,
how did they get over? Did they sail across the Pacific, or did they go through Alaska and come all the way down? Because that's thousands of miles.
I tell you what, this has made me wonder is it would be interesting to do some sort of Russian history episodes just to see where, because I know if I'm placing it in my head, I know Napoleon just lost to Russia technically, just because you can't. I mean, I'm quoting The Princess Bride, but you can't get into a land war with there. He says Asia, but this is Russia when they can retreat into endless subarctic temperatures and crazy fucking vodka fueled lands. I gotta imagine there was some sort of a stretch from, say, if you want to go from like the back half of Russia to Oregon, and there was probably something set up where they either had I mean, it'd be interesting to know what their claims were when it came to coming to America at the time too, because I'm assuming like at the time there was probably some sort of a land grab going on for Russia too, if there was going to be French trappers and Brits. But anyway, we can theorize all day as little history dads, but we'll have to get into that eventually, because I am curious to know what the deal with that is. Now, the rich farmlands, as I said, is what drew them to Oregon. The U.S. put out a patriotic plea for American settlers to move to the Oregon Territory, to establish the claims of the U.S. to Oregon. So many people from the state settled in the Oregon Territory that most of the Oregon Territory went to America. So it was just by probably settling and the fact that we were already sort of there. Before MapQuest, Apple Maps, Siri, and Google satellites and OnStar, things were hard, real hard. You couldn't find a Walgreens to get batteries for your remote control, or remote controls weren't even a thing. In fact, electricity wasn't a thing. You had gas lanterns, things like that. Speedway didn't have rewards, and there wasn't a Starbucks in anyone's minds. Sure, there was coffee, usually made more for the warmth of it than the taste. But if you wanted creamer, you had to milk the fucking cow and do the work. Fast food was the running elk or deer or whatever small game you could catch. The boogeyman was probably angry, and rightfully so, a Native American tribe who sought to return the area to the way things were, and diseases were rampant. So let's talk about diseases during the time. As a history dad myself, every time I look into this stuff, it just seems like we have nothing to complain about nowadays when it comes to disease. I know we just had COVID and it was bad, but you had these things that came up, and dysentery, smallpox, measles, mumps, and influenza were among kind of the primary diseases named in diaries and journals, but cholera, mountain fever, and scurvy were probably the biggest killers. So let's talk cholera. It's not good, folks. So according to the National Park Services, in an article called Cholera, a Trail Epidemic, the early years of the California Gold Rush, Cholera struck each spring at the thronging jumping off towns along the Missouri River, where thousands of gold seekers and Oregon-bound immigrants gathered to outfit. The deadly disease claimed many lives before the victims even had a chance to start across the prairies of Kansas or Nebraska. It claimed many more along the trail corridor to Fort Laramie, Wyoming, and in American Indian encampments and villages as well. So this wasn't just like a shy disease that was like, we're just going to kill the Americans. It didn't matter. With things like this, it never does. It didn't take into account that you were, of the land. Cholera is oh God, this is gross. Cholera is a bacterial infection that causes severe diarrhea and kills its victims through dehydration. The bacteria spreads through water and food containment, contaminated by human waste. So today, cholera is treated by rehydrating the patient with salty solutions. But at that time, the cause, means of transmission, and treatment of the disease were unknown. Travelers spread the infection among the unsanitary outfitting towns and carried it west from campground to campground and waterhole to waterhole. And it was so prevalent. I mean, like you said, if you wanted clean water, you really had to find a babbling brook or a stream. If there were people around, you probably had like a 50-50 shot. Because I mean, look, we I think most Americans will say, I take a shower every day after I get home from work, stinking up like fish, sweating in my pits and my groin. But then, like, at this time, a bath was considered maybe a once a week affair, if that. And it was like more of the French persuasion, just spraying yourself with cologne or slapping your pits with some fucking cold water.
You ever play Red Dead Redemption? So when I was playing that all the time when we were living in Virginia, I played it like every night not every night, but a lot for like 2 years. And there was a bathhouse you could go to and like get a massage and shit. That's a cool ass game. Anyway, that's what I was thinking about when you were talking.
Slapping going to a bathhouse.
Yeah, but everybody's dirty as shit. You only get to bathe once a week, maybe, and it might not even be hot water. Just like no soap. Just
it's funny because that was like one of the few pleasures you're allowed on Sundays when you were in the service during boot camp. And man, that was my favorite part.
I remember that.
It's just sitting in the hot water. Just like
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah. But yeah, people take that one for granted. A hot shower it'll cheer you right up after a shitty fucking day. And that wasn't even an idea really of the time. I mean, I'm sure people had the idea. I did remember in part of the book while I was reading it, they talked about how rather than like, because of the temperatures and because of the experience, they ended up boiling their clothes. And we'll get to how filthy this Donner Party was, but good God.
Dude, this past week, I had to replace my friggin' well pump for the second time in the last year. And we had to go without running water again for a day. And I was thinking about this whole damn, journey out west for the Donner Party. I had to go one day without running water. I had to go up to my dad's and take a shower. I had to fill up buckets to come in and flush the toilets in case we had to take a poop. It's just like one day. And, I just couldn't imagine having to go like throughout your life, like struggling to find water unless, had a readily available source.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's truly something you have to really be grateful for in this day and age. I mean, there's still areas of the world that struggle with running water, things like in India and stuff like that. But like, yeah, we really are. Again, I think the most common text I sent to Casey, who's not a huge fan of history but enjoys some of the little factoids I would send her. My most common text was, "God, we live in better times." But
Yeah.
but anyway, so yeah, as I mentioned, disease and really the quality of life wasn't very good. There was, however, a some different solutions for people who got unsanitary, campgrounds and watering holes. Immigrants treated the sick with pain medications such as camphor, the oil of the Asian camphor tree, and laudanum, a bitter tasting, addictive tincture made from opium, but victims often died within a matter of hours, healthy in the morning and dead by noon. Okay, so this is a quote. For 400 miles, the road was almost a solid graveyard, recalled George Tribble, who traveled in Oregon in 1852. At one campground, I counted 71 graves. Of 10 Tribble family members, of 10 Tribble family members who started west, only 5 reached Oregon. So you got a 50-50 shot, as I said. Most trailside cholera graves are unmarked, but one that is known belongs to 25-year-old George Winslow, who died on June 8, 1849, near present-day Fairbury, Nebraska. Symptoms struck Winslow as his party crossed Kansas, not long after jumping off onto the trail. His company continued west, carrying George in a wagon for the next 6 days. He seemed to be improving, but then a violent thunderstorm struck camp, chilling the sick man. He lingered another week, and a companion, Brackett Lord, sadly wrote home, "George is dead. His body lays here in the tent, but his spirit has fled. Our company feels deeply saddened this solemn province." So he also said, "I never attended so solemn a funeral, but here we are on these plains, hundreds of miles from any civilized being, and to leave one of our number was most trying."
And all he needed was some salt water.
I guess or he needed some fucking laudanum so he could get a quick spike in his step. Winslow's friends buried him deep on a grassy hillside, marked his grave with an inscribed sandstone slab, and sent word back to his wife and family in Connecticut. Many years later, Winslow's sons relocated the gravesite and erected their own kind of beautiful monument beside the trail swales. Owners of the family farm where the grave lives have protected it in the soils since 1873. But that's a little on the Oregon Trail. That's just the Oregon Trail, folks. That's a hippy dippy regular old fucking I-96 or I-90 or I-80 or whatever highway near you, fair listener. What was the Donner Party up to? Were they going to Oregon or California? California was the dream. That's why we got our cool, hip backgrounds. California was the dream, kiddos. So why did they go? Well, really, it's economic difficulties, because at the time it's weird to think of this, but there was a depression in the country at the time. Things just got, well, like they did do now in some areas. It's probably everywhere, but like when inflation happens specifically and people are struggling so much, generally the idea of manifest destiny and moving to a new land or starting over or finding better opportunities really takes over. That's why a lot of people, when the dollar tumbles or there's we'll say in the corporate interest, an opportunity for them to save money, and they send their companies to Mexico or across Europe. They take these opportunities and it fucks us, but it fucks us all in the long run. But at the end of the day, it's a combination of a depression that was happening at the time and the promise of free land. And like I had mentioned before about Oregon, it was similar to that, because technically once you cross the Continental Divide, it was all free. This is the Wild West, folks. We're talking Wild West. This is technically not the US at the time. So there was that concept of like, you know, we can keep going, we can explore, I mean, we can expand. It's the same dream of the Pilgrims coming over in their fucking rinky-dink boats. So the promise of free land and a better climate drew the James Reed and George and Jacob Donner families to travel the California Trail. That's right. This isn't the Oregon Trail. This is the California Trail, and this ain't yo mama's California Trail. The idea of this trail also being confounded by this shortcut. We're going to get into this shortcut. This is kind of the antithesis of this episode, because folks, I sent this to Adam, aka Danger Zone. Don't take a shortcut if you don't know the person who's giving it to you, especially if you don't trust them. And this is a time where a lot of things were word of mouth. And you see, looking at it, it seems sort of silly because at one section, you'd be almost doubling back to your location, according to the map that they were given. People didn't understand was though the area seemed open, there were others who saw this land and said, like, there were other travelers. And see, this is the concept of a wagon trail versus, say, frontiersmen or mountain men out there, kind of one horse, one pack. You know, if you're playing Red Dead, it's a lot easier to move around when you're just the main dude. But the second you get a whole fucking wagon trail, half cholera, half fucking kicked in the head by a mule, you get lost, and you're only as fast as your slowest wagon trail party member. So
there's missions you got to go on where you're dragging wagons to, and it's so hard to get away when you're, when you're on a horse, you can just like scoot across the whole map in like 3 days, real time, because that's how big those fucking maps are on Red Dead.
Dude, the second one's out now. You should get that for PlayStation. I would happily play that with you. They got an online mode. We should. I don't get this is on a podcast. We need to game share or something and play some Red Dead together.
Yeah, Red Dead 2.
Yeah, that's out now.
Yeah, that's been out. That's the one I was talking about. That I played it on my PlayStation 4 in Virginia, but I have a PS5 now, so I have to transfer all my data to it. But
I'll get it if you want to play.
I don't play video games like I used to.
Come on, nerd it up with me just like you do with the history.
I gotta get a fucking external hard drive that can transfer my stuff.
I understand.
Everything's so big, dude. The memory, just like 1 terabyte freaking drives you need. Anyway.
Yeah, I love that we're talking about our gaming woes, and then meanwhile it's just like, so anyway, this guy's bleeding out of his ass and his fucking head falls off. But no, yeah, right. So anyway, so this terrain looks like dog dick, and it basically, like a guy on his own would just be like, yeah, this looks like shit. Thank God there's only me, my horse, and that's it. Not like a whole wagon and family. Laugh out loud. They'd be dead. So what was the Donner Party's biggest mistake? As I mentioned, this shortcut. The biggest mistake that the Donner Party made as well was leaving for their westward journey too late in the spring. They left almost a month after all wagon trains. And this put them in the Sierra Nevada mountains in the heart of winter. Another mistake was taking, as I mentioned, the Hastings Cutoff, which is your shortcut, in an attempt to find a shortcut. This era led to an additional 125 miles of land to cross, which decimated their supplies and hastened their starvation. You see, folks, you don't want to add time on a wagon train.
Yeah, and the real fucked up thing here is that this Hastings dude promised, and I don't, you probably mentioned this, but he said it was going to cut 300 or 400 miles off their trip,
right?
but it ended up adding 125 miles, which back then that's weeks of travel.
Right.
Yeah.
No, you're right. It's not good. As I said, unless you like pork, which is what I hear humans taste like. I'm just saying, if you want to eat each other, because you're gonna run out of supplies. I mean, like I mentioned it, like you got Indians sniping your, either killing or taking your excess, supplies or cattle or ox. You've got terrible heat conditions in certain areas. You've got the Salt Lake, like the flats, that whole area. I mean, it's basically a desert with no water. It's super, super fucking hot, and nobody's got a margarita to use the salt with. So legitimately, your animals are running off because they're spooked, because on top of this, people are seeing mirages in the distance. They're like, and that's not uncommon, especially when you're super dehydrated, malnourished, on the trail, and you're burning calories. Like I read something where it was like on average these people were burning, and this could have been during the snowstorm, but there was one person, they were saying they were at minimum, because I mean a day you burn roughly 2,000-ish calories, as long as you're not just sitting there playing fucking World of Warcraft. But these people were burning close to 3,600 calories. I mean, you could theoretically get away with eating like 5 Big Macs and still be skinny. You're burning, and your organs are working overtime too, because they're trying to stay alive. So not only are you burning calories, but you're losing fat, which you need to burn. And when you start to get into starvation, which kicks in, I think, around 5 or 6 days, your mental capacity starts to really shrink as well. So these people are seeing mirages. They're out in the desert, and then they eventually get to the worst snowstorm on record in the last 175 years in Sierra Nevada. But we'll get to that. And also the fact that Walt Disney built a snow fucking park on the same spot later, because corporate interest got the way, and Mickey said, "Oh boy, let's go sledding, Pluto." During the 19th century, and specifically pre-Civil War times, 1/5 of children died before the age of 10. Most people were used to the chime of church bells and could parse from the chimes the age and gender of the deceased. So as I mentioned, disease, kids dying, people aren't very happy. You have very little to go on, and the idea of getting somewhere could push people to want to venture forth to fertile land and the dream of a magical land called California. So with a late start, surely people could double time it with lost time and a rough snow in California. Can't be that bad, right? Like I said, for nearly 175 years, historians, authors, and educators have claimed that the winter of 1846 to 47 was the snowiest in California history. How did it start? Well, a lot of these people met up on the trail. This wasn't just, and I think we talked a bit with the name, you would think, oh, it was the Donner family. So what, like 13 people? It's like a grandpa, George Donner, and his kids and their offspring. No. What would generally happen in these wagon trains is they would pass from town to town, from fort to farm to strong, like kind of little area with little outposts and and sheds and whatnot, and a couple of loose goats just nibbling on their butts. And then they'd come across like other people who had heard the news of like, oh, hey, have you heard there's land to claim in Oregon, or there's fertile land in California where we can start anew. And so in essence, you have these wagons built up, and there were things, I mean, you would have these communities of women who would bond and get together, and they would work together, say make meals over campfire, and it does sound very romantic, like the idea of the open air and the trail and like kids, you know, learning. And the good news about kids is, and this goes for any parent, usually when you have kids, they can be a real fucking nuisance when you're on the open road, but when they have other kids to preoccupy them, it can kind of take the ease. It cannot ease the travel when it comes to like the haps on the road for the parents and all that. But this wagon party, it really wasn't just the Donners. Like I said, it was the Reeds, it was the Graves, and you had roughly around 87 people at the height of the party on this California trail.
Yeah, and they started with what, 31?
Right.
So it was like Dumb and Dumber, Harry and Lloyd going across country. Pick them up.
Yep. Well said.
Yeah.
Well referenced. So their first bad omen, literally they get this old grandma who's like, hey, I know I'm not gonna last very long, but I would love to see the open trails. Like, she's literally, if she farts wrong, she's probably dead. And during this time, a fart was probably considered, oh, she's got cholera, burn her. But like, this grandma makes it like 2 wagon rotations down the road and then dies.
She died in Kansas, right? No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it set them back 5 days. So on top of this, they started late. The shortcut's going to set them back at 125 miles or whatever. And then this first person dies, and they're like, well, shit.
That was like 2 weeks into it, too. It
Right.
wasn't like, yeah. And they got at least a 6-month trip. So 2 weeks into it, they're already losing time.
Right. And it sucks because it's like, and let's get into this a little bit too, because we're well into our episode here. We're on the open trail. Let me talk about a little bit about decorum here, because we're going to start getting into the fatalities on the open trails. So essentially, when you're on the trail with a wagon party, you had certain little things. You would have people who were, you know, the men stuck together because they were the ones that were usually keeping the oxes moving, keeping the carts moving, making sure that the weight was distributed properly. And this wasn't one of those things where, you know, everybody's sitting in the wagon playing Game Boy Advance. Like, you had to walk along the side of the trail. So like, if you were dead weight, you would fall behind. And people cared about their elderly, and families were tight. Like, specifically the Graves family is the focus in the book, and they were all very good. Like, Franklin Graves is one of the heroes, I would say, of this story, and we'll get into what happens to him. But essentially, these people were very family oriented, but when it came to the elderly, or even kids that would go missing or things like that, like, you could only stand to wait so long. And this grandma, I think, kind of shows that like they did care about people. You know, maybe she wanted to breathe some fresh air and get out there and you know, help swat some mosquitoes for the kids, but like, it does show a kindness that they were still willing to take somebody on, when realistically you didn't want to take anything else on, because it would drive your oxen to walk slower, and extra weight was a big deal. So as these guys continue down the trail, they started in Missouri and were already soaked with rain and not moving very fast because they started getting pelted with rain. I don't know if you've ever had to work outside, ladies and gentlemen, but as a mailman, it can be one of the most miserable experiences, especially if you're even if you're in a raincoat, because usually the heat in your body is just working overtime because you're still sweating, and it's like a weird trap where you just end up soaked regardless of what you can do to stay dry. um and these people, I mean, like, they didn't have like multiple different pairs of clothes. When in the wagon, they'd hang up their day dress and then put on maybe a little less at night for sleep. You'd have things like people would essentially, they're not bathing very much, their clothes aren't getting washed every day because they're trying to move quick. The rain turns the ground into mud, the mud gets all over their clothes. People had like stink on them, and it's not like, again, sanitation isn't really a thing. So like, if you accidentally shit down your bonnet the wrong way, you might be trailing that like little dingleberry with you for the rest of the travels. You might have a hot mess of a stink coming off of you and not know.
Is it a bonnet on your head?
Or whatever.
Is shit on your head?
Hey, you know what?
Fucking face reeks, bro.
I mean, hey, if you can do that, maybe join the circus. You could make some bucks during the time. Anyway, so I'm tangenting a lot. I also, in the book, they talk specifically about how they use sheep gut for condoms in the time because people were still fucking. And that was a primary activity, especially for married people, because Sarah Graves, she was married to a guy named Jay who was on the trip. And one of the things they like to do when they're downtime, when they weren't listening to the fiddle player play at night, after they put the tarp over the wagon or the cover on the wagon so everybody could sit and listen, they would like hold hands. And usually holding hands led to fucking. And if anyone was fucking, they heard it. But I think people just kind of got used to it because everybody was used to living in a one bedroom. And but they use sheep gut for condoms. And if you know anything about uh if you know anything about condoms, one of the nice things is that when you use one, you can take it off and throw it away and put on a new one. These times, they're generally using the same sheep gut condom every single time, which they had to wash. Also,
that's so fucking disgusting.
It is gross. Plus, you had things like you they had different tinctures and different modifications when it came to cleaning that downstairs area out so that they could clean it out if the person was able to, because the yeast infections were pretty rampant and the smell of menstruation was another added bonus that I read about in that book. But no hate to the ladies. I'm sure the fellas weren't smelling very good either, especially if they were shitting on their heads. But so anyway, God, I could sit and talk about that series. That part of the book is so fascinating, but also so disgusting. Continuing.
Yeah, I didn't get into any of that in the research that I did about this. Yeah, so that
Well,
I mean, it's kind of a thought in the back of your head when you're traveling across a country like this, but you don't really think about it too much. But
right.
yeah, that had to have been gross.
It was gross. It was very gross. I mean, look, we've all been on long car rides, but this takes it to a new level. And not only that, and I don't think I mentioned this yet, these families didn't necessarily know each other. And it was pretty quick that they were getting on each other's nerves. Because, look, we all put up an air of decorum when we're meeting new people. But if there's one thing that will quickly turn people to show their real sides, it's living together. Every little thing from not putting the seat down, to not, putting your shit away. These little beats, I'm sure, were already starting to get on each other's nerves as they're heading down this trail that is not easy to get through. The Donners and the Reeds didn't get along. They weren't family, and besides having to deal with extra mouths and opinions, it can be hard. People real quick start to show who they are. They did make it smoothly across Wyoming and Nebraska, so there's your brief moment of niceness. In fact, they did nice things at night, and one of them would play his fiddle and they'd sing songs. And like I said, Sarah Graves and her new husband Jay would hold hands and talk about their dreams in California. They did meet more families on the journey: the Breens, the Murphys, the Eddies, and I didn't mention this. The Graves family were chicken and beef farmers with 9 kids.
Dude, I think they all had like 5, 6, 10, 8 fucking kids. There was at the end or at the peak, like you said, there was 87. And what was it? 48 or so, little more than half were children.
87, and then at the very end it's 46 that survived, and over half were children. So
yeah, so like half the whole damn party was kids.
Yeah. I mean,
and these aren't like, they're all not all teenagers. They're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're tons of babies.
Yeah.
You're walking across the country over a 6 to 8 month period
in the
with
rain, the
infants,
smelling like fucking rotten pennies, and you got a screaming infant, and the only solace you get is a fiddle player, and you get to hold your husband's hand. Things were easier when we were chicken and beef farmers.
And get fucked with a sheep gut condom.
Hey, did you wash the sheep gut? Don't stick that shit in me, Carl. Chicken and beef sounds like a carnival taco stand on a 120-degree day.
Chicken and
beef farmer. I'll take some chicken and bees. Nevertheless, it was essentially an 80 people deep wagon party. You had Teamsters, which we didn't really mention, single men looking for a group to follow out to California. As Adam alluded to, of the 87, though, 46 would die from starvation, disease, gunshot wound accidents, and at least 4 murders. The group was by all history known as the Donner Party, and George Donner, known as Uncle, that was his nickname, was considered the leader, but James Reed was really secretly in charge. By using the Hastings cutoff. Now, to promote the new route, Lansford Hastings sent riders to deliver letters to traveling migrants. On July 12th, the Reeds and Donners were given one of them. Hastings warned the migrants they could expect opposition from the Mexican authorities in California and advised them to band together in large groups. He also claimed to have worked out a new and better road to California and said he would be waiting at Fort Bridger to guide the migrants along the new cutoff. On July 20th, at the Little Sandy River, most of the wagon train opted to follow the established trail via Fort Hall. A smaller group opted to head for Fort Bridger and needed a leader. Most of the young men in the group were European immigrants and not considered to be ideal leaders. James Reed had lived in the U.S. for a considerable time, was older, and had military experience, but his autocratic attitude had rubbed many in the party the wrong way, and they saw him as aristocratic, imperious, and ostentatious. I will mention some things about James Reed here. He is an interesting character because he gives me the vibe of kind of like almost like the spit and polish Benedict Arnold, like aristocrat vibe, especially during like a, Deadwood era kind of frontiers life. So I could see them being like, well, I don't trust this one. He's fucking weird. he doesn't fuck with the sheep gut. There's some interesting kind of balance happening there, and having somebody with a nickname like Uncle and being like the friendly. I mean, I understand where they want somebody more along the lines that they trust. More
Did you
affable.
hear? Did the book mention anything about the Reed family wagons? Because you're talking about how
The double decker.
yeah. So you're talking how he's aristocratic. Yeah. So he had these like really extravagant at the time wagons where you had like double decker, like secret bunk you could sleep in, more privacy, but they were and you alluded to weight earlier, like the weight of these wagons slowed them down exponentially
Yep.
because they're just like full of like just unnecessary shit. But they're
Well, like heavy, I mean, portable versions of like appliances we all take for granted now, but you had these big steel, like Dutch oven things that they would just pack into these. And like, it gets to a point here where they're just throwing shit off. Like, one of the girls had to hide a doll. In fact, it's in like some museum or something. She had a little wooden doll that she kept with her, but it was like a sign of just something that was, I mean, for all these people in this world that are so materialistic and have so much bullshit, I just say at the end of the day, all I need are my friends and family. I'll figure it out as I go along. I'll start fresh anywhere. And they did rather quickly get rid of excess baggage, especially after they started losing a lot of their livestock. So, by comparison, the mature, experienced American-born Donner's peaceful demeanor, I think, and charitable nature made him the group's first choice. George Donner. While the members of the party were comfortably well off by contemporary standards, most of them were inexperienced in long, difficult overland travel. Additionally, the party had little knowledge about how to interact with Native Americans. Journalist Edwin Bryant reached Black Forks a week ahead of the Donner Party. He saw the first part of the trail and was concerned that it would be difficult for the wagons in the Donner group, especially with so many women and children. He returned to Black Forks to leave letters warning several members of the group not to take Hastings' shortcut. By the time the Donner Party reached Black Forks on July 27th, Hastings had already left, leading the 40 wagons of the Harlan Young group. Because Jim Bridger's trading post would fare substantially better if people used the Hastings cutoff, Bridger told the party that the shortcut was a smooth trip. Come on, motherfucker. That makes me so mad. It just shows you that people sometimes, it's like all the credit card companies in America, all the places that want you to sign up for their low interest, rate. You get 6 months and then you can pay it off. And then like they jack the interest rates up to like 200%, or these cashback places. It's the same bullshit, and it's been going on since the dawn of man. There was somebody in medieval fucking Europe that was selling rocks with googly eyes on them for like all you had on you and taking it. And this just shows that it's been there forever, folks. As I said, so they reached Black Forks July 27th. And the trading post was bullshit. Bridger told the party that the shortcut was a smooth trip devoid of rugged country and hostile Native Americans, and would therefore shorten their journey by 350 miles. Water would be easy to find along the way, although a couple of days crossing a 30 to 40 mile dry lake bed would be necessary. Reed was very impressed with this information and advocated for the Hastings cutoff. None of the party received Bryant's letters warning them to avoid Hastings' route at all costs. In his diary account, Bryant states his conviction that Bridger deliberately concealed the letters. A view shared by Reed in his later testimony.
Yeah, I wanted to make a couple bucks.
Yeah. At Fort Laramie, Reed met an old man, old friend named James Kleiman, who was coming from California. Kleiman warned Reed not to take the Hastings cutoff, telling him that wagons would not be able to make it and the Hastings information was inaccurate. fellow pioneer Jesse Quinn Thornton traveled part of the way with Donner and Reed, and in his book From Oregon and California in 1848 declared Hastings the Baron Munchausen of travelers in these countries. Tamsin Donner, according to Thornton, was gloomy, sad, and dispirited at the thought of advice from Hastings. She didn't like it. She just considered, what do these selfish, city dwelling, no good having folks want to do with our wagon party and have this information? This is just a pamphlet. We're just we're just reading some goofballs bullshit. We need to be smart. Tamsin knew it, and it's sad. We'll get into more of what's about to happen here, but on July 31st, 1846, the Donner Party left Black Forks after 4 days of rest and wagon repairs, 11 days behind the leading Harlan Young group. Donner hired a replacement driver, and the company was joined by the McCutcheon family, consisting of William 30, his wife Amanda, and their 2-year-old daughter Harriet, and a 16-year-old named Jean-Baptiste Trudeau from New Mexico, who claimed to have knowledge of the Native Americans and train on the way to California. And this is a good aspect to have, especially on the open trails, is somebody who knows how to communicate with the Native Americans. Yeah, so I said William 30, his wife Amanda, she was 24. The party turned south to follow the Hastings cutoff. So after all these warning signs, just so you know, there were warnings. People did say, hey, you're not going to make it. You're not, hey guys, construction, detour, go this way, go, turn around. As every wagon trail went the other way, like, these guys were like, hey man, it's a cutoff. Let's try it.
Yeah, this is, up until now, they had a relatively smooth trip. And we're talking, we're 3 months into the trip now?
Yeah.
And it's been relatively smooth. Yeah, there's been the Syracuse death and a little bumpy here and there. And, obviously the smell of sheepskin condoms and shit like that. But
totally.
Then this was kind of the turning point, I think, for this whole thing. And I don't want to take any of your thunder, but when
go ahead.
When Reed decided to, against the warnings and everything that they got, and they still went with the Hastings cutoff, like, this is where shit really went south for all these people. Like, this was the turning point of this. If they had not taken the Hastings cutoff, the Donner Party, we wouldn't even be talking about it, because it would have never been a story. Right. But this is where it just really, the whole shit goes down. Go on.
So, thank you for setting me up, DangerZone. You are my brother. Hastings wrote directions and left letters stuck to trees. On August 6th, the party found a letter from him advising them to stop until he could show them an alternate route to that taken by the Harlan Young party. So there was the party ahead, and there were people who were like, there was some conscience in Hastings to be like, fuck, this is not as good as I thought. Reed, Charles T. Stanton, and William Pike rode ahead to get Hastings. They encountered exceedingly difficult canyons where boulders had to be moved and walls cut off precariously to a river below, a route likely to break wagons. In his letter, Hastings had offered to guide the Donner Party around the more difficult areas, but he rode back only partway, indicating the general direction to follow. Stanton and Pike stopped to rest, and Reed returned alone to the group, arriving 4 days after the party's departure, without the guide they had been promised. The group had decided whether to turn back and rejoin the traditional trail following the tracks left by the Harlan Young party through the difficult terrain of Weber Canyon, or forge their own trail in the direction that Hastings had recommended. At Reed's urging, the group chose the new Hastings route. Again, they're like, well, we got to try it. Everything's saying don't do it, But you know what? I want to do it. Their progress slowed to about 1.5 miles a day. All able-bodied men were required to clear brush, fell trees, and heave rocks to make room for the wagons. So this is slow going.
You're literally building the fucking Eisenhower interstate system by hand.
He's not wrong, folks.
You're making a road to go, and at the same time it just 1 mile a day. You know how long? 5,280 feet.
Right.
If that's all you're moving in one day,
All right.
that's insane. That's insane.
It is. And you're tiring people out too. And people's nerves are shot because they're already like, we've been on this trail 3 months. I don't like the Donners. The Reeds don't like the Donner, or the Reeds don't like the Donners. The Donners don't like the Reeds. Everybody's just fucking up each other's ass, smelling like shit. And now they're making a road on top of walking a trail. This sucks. So as the Donner Party made its way across the Wasatch Range of the Rocky Mountains, the Graves family, who'd set off to find them, reached them. They consisted of Franklin Ward Graves, his wife Elizabeth, their children Mary, William, Eleanor, Lavina, Nancy, Jonathan, Franklin Jr., Elizabeth, and married daughter Sarah, who is the subject, the main focus of the book. She was 22 and married to Jay Fostick, 23, and a 25-year-old teamster named John Snyder, traveling together in 3 wagons. Their arrival brought the Donner Party to 87 members and 60 to 80 wagons. The Graves family had been part of the last group to leave Missouri, confirming the Donner Party was at the back of the year's Western exodus. It was August 20th by the time they reached a point in the mountains where they could look down and see the Great Salt Lake. It took almost another 2 weeks to travel out of the Wasatch Range. The men
I don't know why that's so funny to me. Look at that lake. Womp, 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 womp.
I'm just saying, the Salt Lake, it's like, I can't think of a more miserable time than this, other than the snow. And being we live in the fucking lake effect range, the two of us, like, we know snow. But,
yeah.
But this sucked. The men were arguing and doubts were expressed about the wisdom of those who had chosen the route, in particular Reed. So Reed's on everybody's last nerve. Food and supplies began to run out, some of the less affluent families. Stanton and Pike had ridden out with Reed, but had become lost on their way back. By the time that the party found them, they were a day away from eating their horses. Luke Halloran died of consumption on August 25th. A few days later, the party came across a torn and tattered letter from Hastings. The pieces indicated there were 2 days and nights of difficult travel ahead without grass or water. The party rested their oxen and prepared for the trip. After 36 hours, they set out to traverse a 1,000-foot mountain that lay in their path. From its peak, they saw ahead of them a dry, barren plain, perfectly flat and covered with white salt. And this salt got in everything. Like I said, your clothes aren't clean, so it's everything's sticking to it. The ox are like thirsty. You're trying to basically give as much water as you can to your family, but also to the animals. So like, your supplies dwindle quick. As I said, it's flat. This is where people were seeing mirages off in the distance, like maybe like the Hawaiian Tropics girls for one of the Teamsters. He's like, man, I picked the wrong goddamn wagon train, brother. Should have stayed in Kansas City.
Dude, when you're driving, so you asked me earlier if I'd been over here. So when you take I-80 through Utah, and you go through the Salt Lake area, desert, the salt flats, right? I remember this vividly. So you're driving and you see all these tire tracks going off the interstate and down into the salt flats.
Mhm.
And they're everywhere. And you're driving for 100 miles and you just keep seeing, like, why are all these people like going off the road? Well, apparently, and if you're from Utah and listening to this shit, this is what I heard, but apparently it's something fun for people to do where they'll be fucking flying down 80 in the middle of the night and they just fucking go off the road and just go bahan through the salt flats. And then they get back up onto the fucking interstate and there's no cops. It's just
Right.
like 100 miles of, nothing. But
Mhm.
I was saying to Dane, I'm like, dude, well, look at fucking all these tire tracks. And I think he was driving. So I was looking it up, Googling it. Like, why are all these tire tracks going through like Great Salt Lake Desert? But apparently people fly off the road for fun and like fucking do Fast and the Furious and then get back on the highway and go.
They get to do their own little Grand Theft Auto Salt Lakes version. I get
Yeah,
it.
I mean, but it's flat, it's dry, it's just that would suck crossing that with 80 wagons.
And yeah, and everybody's pissing and moaning the whole way.
Yeah.
So they continue on. It was according to Rarick on the journey, he said it was one of the most inhospitable places on earth. Their oxen were already fatigued and their water was nearly gone. The Donner Party pressed onward on August 30th, having no alternative. In the heat of the day, the moisture underneath the salt crust rose to the surface and turned it into a gummy mass. The wagon wheels sank into it, and in some cases, up the hubs. The days were blisteringly hot and nights frigid. That is always the interesting part about the desert, is how cold it gets at night. Several of the group saw visions of lakes and wagon trains and believed they had finally overtaken Hastings. After 3 days, the water was gone, and some of the party removed their oxen from the wagons to press ahead to find more. Some of the animals were so weakened they were left yoked to the wagons and abandoned. 9 of Reed's 10 oxen, 9 of 10, broke free, crazed with thirst, and bolted off into the desert. Many other families, cattle, and horses had also gone missing. The rigors of the journey resulted in irreparable damage to some of the wagons, but no human lives had been lost. Instead of the promised 2-day journey over 40 miles, the journey across the 80 miles of Great Salt Lake Desert took 6. 2 days to 6. 2 days to 6.
More wasted time.
Yeah. None of the party had any remaining faith in the Hastings cutoff as they recovered at the springs on the other side of the desert. They spent several days trying to recover cattle, retrieve the wagons left in the desert, and transfer their food and supplies to other wagons. Reed's family incurred the heaviest losses, and Reed became more assertive, asking all the families to submit an inventory of their goods and food to him. He suggested that 2 men should go to Sutter's Fort in California. He had heard that John Sutter was exceedingly generous to wayward pioneers and could assist them with extra provisions. Charles Stanton and William McCutcheon volunteered to undertake the dangerous trip. The remaining serviceable wagons were pulled by mongrel teams of cows, oxen, and mules. It was the middle of September, and 2 young men who went in search of mixing oxen reported that another 40 miles of desert lay ahead. Their cattle and oxen were now exhausted and lean, but the Donner Party crossed the next stretch of desert relatively unscathed. The journey seemed to get easier, particularly through the valley next to the Ruby Mountains. Despite their near hatred of Hastings, they had no choice but to follow his tracks, which were weeks old. On September 26, 2 months after embarking the cutoff, the party rejoined the traditional trail along a stream that became known as the Humboldt River. The shortcut had probably delayed them by a month. Along the Humboldt River, the group met Paiute Native Americans, who joined them for a couple of days, but stole or shot several oxen and horses. Geez, guys, can we just get along, smoke our pipes?
It's just getting worse and worse for these guys.
There was a part in the book where I remember somebody like was talking about like a Native American just like pulling up on a wagon and seeing like a young, beautiful woman, like a, teen woman ish, 19, 20, and being like, "Oh, white man, I'll give you many stalks of corn for your woman." And having to like show them his revolver and them being like, "Brr," and like running off and being pissed off. So they would run into these instances with Indians where like the communication would be, hardly there, and they would try to barter with them, and then also half the time not even know if they can trust them. And I get it. I mean, these are the people that knew the way of the land, and unfortunately, you didn't have them all integrated into this group, especially when it came to some of the terrain we're about to head into here. So, this is where we get to Moida. Two wagons in the remaining group became tangled, and John Snyder angrily beat the ox of Reed's hired teamster, Milt Elliott. When Reed intervened, Snyder proceeded to rain blows down onto his head with a whip handle. When Reed's wife attempted to intervene, she too was struck. Reed retaliated by fatally plunging a knife under Snyder's collarbone. And this was not the way you wanted things to go, because John Snyder was not only a cool cucumber when it came to the rest of the wagon party, and Reed was kind of considered the piece of dog shit of the group. Having somebody die, especially from murder, just because, your fucking horses or your oxen get all tangled up, is kind of a shitty way for things to go at this point, especially when people are irritated and the women got to gossiping and things weren't good. And pioneer frontier law isn't going to be too kind on Reed. That evening, the witnesses gathered to discuss what was to be done. American laws were not applicable west of the Continental Divide in what was then Mexican territory. The wagons trains often dispensed their own justice, but George Donner, the party's leader, was a full day ahead of the main wagon train with his family. Snyder had been seen to hit Reed, and some claimed he had also hit his wife, but Snyder had been popular and Reed was not. Kesselberg suggested that Reed should be hanged, but an eventual compromise allowed Reed to leave the camp without his family, who were to be taken care of by the others. Reed departed alone the next morning, unarmed, but his stepdaughter Virginia rode ahead and secretly provided him with a rifle and food.
That's got to be hard to leave your family behind. I mean, yeah, you just basically, you murdered somebody.
Right. No,
you're
this is, yeah, no, this sucks. It sucks. But given the circumstances, I'm not surprised how this plays out.
What is because I don't know the answer to this because it wasn't answered in any of the shit that I read or watched. Like, why didn't they all the Reeds like go? Why
Because
just James?
Well,
I mean, could they really force the what was it, Margaret and their children to stay? Like, how come they didn't all go?
I think they had gone, essentially, I think they had gone so far together. And I think he saw the writing on the wall. In this instance, if he could get ahead anyways, he could report back. And he does come back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Not only does he come back, he comes back with reinforcements to be part of one of the rescue groups. He even fights in the war at the time. But I think the idea was that if I can get ahead, maybe I can do better if I leave the group, and I'll know where they are. I know who they're traveling with. I don't want to spill any more blood. I don't want to, regardless of the shitty situation, I think it was just one of those things where it was like, look, if these guys are going to get there and I can go ahead and kind of get the one up on the group anyways, it's only going to help. Because I think even he could probably sense that traveling in any sort of group, even as a family, as a group, you're gonna be slowed down, but he could make serious headway on his own. So that would be my only explanation. I don't think it really got into it too far in the book. It was just more focused on the murder and his being exiled. The trials that the Donner Party had so far endured resulted in splintered groups, each looking out for themselves and distrustful of the others. Grass was becoming scarce and the animals were steadily weakening. To relieve the animals' load, everyone was expected to walk. Kesselberg ejected Hardcoop from his wagon, telling the elderman that he had to walk or die. So there was an old man. This is another one of the deaths. A few days later, Hardcoop sat next to a stream, his feet so swollen they had split open. He was not seen again. In fact, one of the last things they said is they looked back and they could just see this old man sit down and probably light up his clay pipe and just say, I guess this is where I get off, which is sad, but it's true, and it's telling of how difficult the journey was that they couldn't double back. They'd already been so late. They had to take some of that weight off the wagons.
Yeah, and this Hardcoop dude was 70 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just, old timer, and they just left him there on the side of the wagon trail.
William Eddy pleaded with the others to find him, but they all refused, swearing they would waste no more resources on a man who was almost 70. Meanwhile, Reed caught up with the Donners and proceeded with one of his teamsters, Walter Heron. The two shared a horse and were able to cover 25 to 40 miles per day. The rest of the party rejoined the Donners, but their hardship continued. Native Americans chased away all of Graves' horses, and another wagon was left behind. With the grass in short supply, the cattle spread out more, which allowed the Paiutes to steal 18 more during one evening. Several mornings later, they shot another 21.
How many cattle did they have starting out? Do you know? Because I don't. I've seen the numbers that they lost, but I never found out how much they actually started with. So they lost 100 cattle at this point now.
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah,
I mean,
it's an obscene amount. I mean, this is the tough part about it. These people did prepare for the worst case scenario. And they did take things with them. In fact, the Graves themselves had a box that they kept hidden in one of their wagons of different types of currency, because you also got to remember that this is a different time in the world. So they had like Spanish doubloons, fucking Mexican dineros, American dollars, all different types of things, just to make sure that they had something. And it's the type of stuff you would think, encrypt my data, take my external hard drives, back up my iCloud, all the precautions you would think to take. They took a ton of livestock, they took a ton of water, they took their rest in when they got it. But the elements just keep on fucking them. So the company had lost nearly 100 oxen and cattle, and their rations were almost completely depleted. With nearly all his cattle gone, Wolfinger stopped at the Humboldt sink to cache/bury his wagon. Reinhardt and Spitzer stayed behind to help. They returned without him, reporting they had been attacked by Paiutes and he had been killed. One more stretch of desert lay ahead. The Eddy's oxen had been killed by Native Americans and they were forced to abandon their wagon. The family had eaten all their stores, but the other families refused to assist their children. The Eddies were forced to walk, carrying their children and miserable with thirst. So not only are you walking and not carrying all your supplies in a wagon, but you're carrying your goddamn kids, or probably covered in boogies, giving you wet willies, sticking their finger in your ear, and you're like, God damn it. God damn it, Ezekiel. Leave me alone. I got to deal with flies and your mom. I don't need you fucking braiding my beard. Margaret Reed and her children were also now without a wagon, but the desert soon came to an end and the party found the Truckee River in beautiful, lush country. And Adam, you mentioned you'd been there. It was a pretty beautiful place, huh?
Yeah, dude. it's really pretty. That whole drive going through like Sierras and then going into, like Reno and cutting across like the northern half of Nevada and into Utah. Just really, really pretty for a kid from New York. I feel like I'm pretty well traveled. I've been around the world a little bit. I've been to pretty much every little nook and cranny of the United States, but that's a pretty cool place. Um, just views that we don't have out here on the East Coast. It's
That's cool, man. I know
it's-
upstate New York is very beautiful too.
yeah, I mean, but it's
Even,
something I'm used to.
even places we lived, like Iceland and Greece, were gorgeous in spots. I mean, the whole world is a great place, and you should travel, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
the company had little time to rest. They pressed on to cross the Sierra Nevada before the snows came. Stanton, one of the two men who had left a month earlier to seek assistance in California, found the company. He brought mules and food from Sutter's Fort and two Native American guides employed by John Sutter. These Miwok men from the Casumen's River area were known by the Catholic conversion names Louis and Salvador. Stanton also brought news that Reed and Heron, although haggard and starving, had succeeded in reaching Sutter's Fort. By this point, according to Rarick, to the bedraggled, half-starved members of the Donner Party, it must have seemed that the worst of their problems had passed. They had already endured more than many immigrants ever did. Faced with one last push over mountains that were described as much worse than the Wasatch Range, the Donner Party had to decide whether to forge ahead or rest their cattle. It was October 20th, and they had been told the pass would not be snowed in until the middle of November. William Pike was killed when a gun being loaded by William Foster was discharged negligently. R.I.P. But man, how many gun mishaps happened in the Wild West?
So this fucking guy, William Foster, was played by Crispin Glover in the Donner Party movie that I watched. I think I told you about it. I'm not sure if you watched it,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
so
No, I
Crispin
saw.
Glover, he's got that really timid, like he plays the same character as he did as George McFly. He plays like this really timid, like he's just he's not good with guns. I think I think it's Stanton in the beginning, or one of them. But anyway, he's the one who's got the rifle, and and Foster can't. He doesn't handle guns, and so yeah, he just like shoots this guy on accident. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Point that shit away from
Come
fucking
on, you knucklehead. Are you going to scope yourself next? So, an event
what
that's
a fucking guy. Come on, it's just like fucking gun safety 101, dude.
all right. So,
uh
this event seemed to make the decision for them. Family by family, they resumed their journey. First the Breens, then the Kesselbergs, Stanton with the Reeds, Graves, and the Murphys. The Donners waited and traveled last. After a few miles of rough terrain, an axle broke on one of their wagons. Jacob and George Donner went into the woods to fashion a replacement. George Donner sliced his hand open while chiseling the wood, but it seemed a superficial wound. But it's bad because it's going to slowly start to get infected. Snow began to fall.
they didn't have bacitracin out there in the mountains. Oh, no
Didn't have
triple antibiotic.
Band-Aids. Here, Susan, give me your sheep gut. Let me cover my hand.
Ugh.
No, still got juice on it. The Breens made it up the massive, nearly vertical slope, 1,000 feet to Truckee Lake, now known as Donner Lake. 3 miles from the summit and camped near a cabin that had been built 2 years earlier by 3 members of the Stephen Townsend Murphy party. The Eddies and the Kesselbergs joined the Breens, attempting to make it over the pass, but they found 5 to 10 foot snowdrifts and were unable to find the trail. They turned back for Truckee Lake, and within a day, all the families were camped there except for the Donners, who were 5 miles, half a day's journey below them. On the evening of November 4, it began to snow again. Ooh,
That's a lot of snow, man. I mean, like you said at the beginning,
5 to
a
10
little bit.
feet drifts. Yeah.
Yeah, so like you're from Grand Rapids area, I'm from Syracuse area. We're both used to the lake effect snow, and we get nor'easters and stuff a little more frequently than you do. But we're used to, a good dumping of snow, 1-2 feet.
Mm-hmm.
But the shit that the shit that they say, like my house where I'm at, I'm 900 feet above sea level. Um, we get about 120 inches of snow per year. It's about 10 feet over the course of 3 or 4 months. These guys, the fucking Sierra Nevadas, dude, they get feet every single day for 3 to 4 months. So they're looking at, just massive amounts of snowfall, uh, which is really difficult to deal with today with our technology. Now
Yeah.
we're talking, 180 years ago when they didn't have shit. Like, how the fuck are they supposed to do anything? There was no roads going through the mountains. There was nothing plowed, sanded, salted. They got wagons, horses, cattle. They're not moving. They're stuck.
Right.
Yeah, it just absolutely terrifying fucking scenario.
Yeah, and it's the worst winter in 175 years, as I stated. So these guys, sensing something was up, 60 members and associates of the Breen, Graves, Reed, Murphy, Kesselberg, and Eddy families set up for winter at Truckee Lake. 3 widely separated cabins of pine logs served as their homes, with dirt floors and poorly constructed flat roofs that leaked when it rained. The Breens occupied one cabin, the Eddies and the Murphys another, and the Reeds and the Graves the third. Kesselberg built a lean-to for his family against the side of the Breen cabin. The families used canvas or oxhide to patch the faulty roofs. The cabins had no windows or doors, only large holes to allow entry. Of the 60 at Truckee Lake, 19 were men over age 18, 12 were women, and 29 were children, 6 of whom were toddlers or younger. Farther down the trail, closer to Alder Creek, the Donner families hastily constructed tents to house 21 people, including Miss Wolfinger, her child, and the Donner's drivers, 6 men, 3 women, and 12 children in all. It began to snow again on the evening of November 4th, the beginning of a storm that lasted 8 days. I like it when it snows and then it stops after a couple hours. 8 fucking days? Fuck me sideways.
I love snow. I love
Mhm.
being back home and dealing with, even though we haven't really had a bad winter yet since I moved home. But I love snow. Fucking bring it on.
Right.
But I mean, the 1 or 2 days, if you get 20, 30 inches of snow, like, all right, that's enough. Like, let's wrap it up here, Mother Nature. Got fucking shit to do. I got to walk down to the end of the driveway and get my mail. Come on.
I know,
Like,
I get it.
I got my snowmobile stuck in my driveway this last winter, I guess. The fucking drifts in my driveway were like 36 inches deep, and I was like, I'm gonna bomb through there on my snowmobile, and I fucking just like buried it. Took me like 2 hours to dig myself out of it. It was so stupid. My dad couldn't get up the driveway with the plow. It was horrible.
I can just see your dad out there hooting and hollering, jumping up and down like Yosemite Sam.
Oh, dude, it's just whatever. But I love snow. But yeah, I'm with you. After a little while, like, let's cut it off. We got to do shit.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody's got to make a trip to fucking Aldi or whatever and get some sarsaparillas. So by the time the party made camp, very little food remained from the supplies that Stanton had brought back from Sutter's Fort. The oxen began to die and their carcasses were frozen and stacked. Truckee Lake was not yet frozen, but the pioneers were unfamiliar with catching lake trout. Eddy, the most experienced hunter, killed a bear, but had little luck with after that. And that part of the book was fucking insane. Like killing the bear, like big ups to Eddy for that kill, because that was not easy. I mean, an 800-pound bear in a pounding snowstorm, that man has balls the size of the moon. The Reed and Eddy families had lost almost everything. Margaret Reed promised to pay double when they got to California for the use of the 3 oxen from the Graves and Breen families. Graves charged Eddie $25, normally the cost of 2 healthy oxen, for the carcass of an ox that had starved to death. So supplies dwindled. Desperation grew in camp, and some reasoned that individuals might succeed in navigating the pass where the wagons could not. In small groups, they made several attempts, but each time returned defeated. Another severe storm lasting more than a week covered the area so deeply that the cattle and horses, their only remaining food, died and were lost in the snow. Patrick Breen began keeping a diary on November 20th. He concerned himself primarily with the weather, marking the storms and how much snow had fallen, but gradually began to include references to God and religion in his entries. So people's minds are starting to really drift here. People are starting to get really fucking concerned. Like, not only did the shortcut and all of the signs that led to this coming really start to play on them physically, but mentally, you're starting to really start to go, whoa, maybe we should have stayed in Missouri, fellas, ladies, gentlemen, boys and girls, because I think everything right now is telling us we're fucked.
Yeah, I would have been second guessing myself the whole damn time. I mean,
I would have been second guessing myself at the Salt Lake Flats. I think I would have just got on my horse and grabbed my wife and said, peace. But
yeah, go back to Wyoming, wait it out a couple months, have
Yeah.
a couple fucking whiskeys, like just
No.
chill out. You
No.
know, but it's fuck. Just think about it for a second. They're in the middle of the mountain. There's tons of snow. There's no light. I mean, there's nothing, except fire, campfire, light, shit like that. I mean, maybe they had
Well, with
some.
8 days of snow, it's not like you can keep a real good campfire going either. I mean, there was one of the cabins was built into the side of a rock formation. So they were able to, like, because you have to be able to like get the smoke to excite, like you're building like some sort of a chute to carry the smoke out.
I saw that. I watched a YouTube. I think the channel was like called Ask a Mortician or something. And
mhm.
she did a thing and she showed that rock that the cabin was built up against, a big flat.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I know what you're talking about.
But you have to have some sort of exhaust for all the smoke, especially because you can't really, like I said, 8 days of snow and then another snow and another snow and another snow, and it doesn't stop, folks. I'm just going to tell you now, spoiler alert, it keeps snowing. You can't really have a fire out in those conditions, and you have to build it inside. So visibility is nil. And we're going to get into snow blindness as that starts to come up as we get into the Forlorn Hope, which was named one of the groups that decided that they were going to press on. Old fucking Franklin Graves and his party. With a name like Forlorn Hope, you know that this isn't going to be a good thing either. So Truckee Lake. Life at Truckee Lake was miserable. The cabins were cramped and filthy, and it snowed so much that people were unable to go outdoors for days. Diet soon consisted of oxide, strips of which were boiled to make a disagreeable glue-like jelly. So they're eating like glue in the cold, in sitting on dirt, freezing their asses off with dead animals everywhere. Ox and horse bones were boiled repeatedly to make soup, which I guess, I mean, you get bone marrow out of a bone. If you can make it bite in, you can be able to bite into it at that point. They became so brittle that they would crumble upon chewing. Sometimes they were softened by being charred and eaten. Bit by bit, the Murphy children picked apart the oxide rug that lay in front of their fireplace, roasted it in the fire, and ate it. After the departure of the snowshoe party / the Forlorn Hope, 2/3 of the migrants at Truckee Lake were children. Miss Graves was in charge of 8, and Lavina Murphy and Eleanor Eddy together took care of 9. Migrants caught and ate mice that strayed into their cabins. Many were soon weakened and spent most of their time in bed. Occasionally, one would be able to make the full-day trek to see the Donners. News came that Jacob Donner and 3 hired men had died. One of them, Joseph Reinhardt, confessed on his deathbed that he had murdered Wolfinger. George Donner's hand had become infected, which left 4 men to work at the Donner camp. Margaret Reed had managed to save enough food for a Christmas pot of soup, to the delight of her children, but by January they were facing starvation and considered eating the ox hides that served as their roof. Margaret Reed, Virginia Reed, Milt Elliott, and the servant girl Eliza Williams attempted to walk out, reasoning that it would be better to try to bring food back than sit and watch the children starve. They were gone for 4 days in the snow before they had to turn back. Their cabin was now uninhabitable. The oxhide roof served as their food supply, and the family moved in with the Breens. The servants went to live with other families. One day the Graveses came by to collect on the debt owed by the Reeds and took the ox hides, all that the family had to eat. And here's where we get to the forlorn hope. It was Antonio, Louise, Salvador, Charles Berger, Patrick Dolan, William Eddy, Jay Fosdick, Sarah Foster, William Foster, Franklin Graves, who was the elder statesman of the group at 57. Marianne Graves, Lemuel Murphy, William Murphy, Amanda McCutcheon, Harriet Pike, and Charles Stanton. The youngest of this group was William Murphy at 10 years of age. The mountain party at Truckee Lake began to fail. Augustus Spitzer and Bayless Williams, a driver for the Reeds, died more from malnutrition than starvation. Franklin Graves fashioned 14 pairs of snowshoes out of ox bows and hide, which I got to give it to Franklin for that idea, because it was really him who was like, look, we're not all going to fucking die here. Everybody's eating their goddamn roofs. We got to get through this mountain pass, get to the other side, get to the fort, get to the farm, get to some sort of resources and save these fucking kids. And
it was a good idea.
It was a good idea. The snowshoes were a really good idea, but here's the problem. 10 feet of snow, every single step you take, your foot goes down into that snow, and you got to have the energy to bring that fucker right back up and do another one and another one and another one. Like I said, like 3,600 calories worth of burning and churning throughout the day, and your internal organs are already trying to fight the cold. And these people didn't have much for clothing. I mean, they're starved, they're half naked, they look like zombies. This party of 17 men, women, and children set out on foot in an attempt to cross the mountain pass. As evidence of how grim their choices were, 4 of the men were fathers, 3 of them women who were mothers, gave their young children to other women. They packed lightly, taking what had become 6 days' rations, a rifle, a blanket each, a hatchet, and some pistols, hoping to make their way to Bear Valley. Historian Charles McGlashan later called this snowshoe party the Forlorn Hope. 2 of those without snowshoes, Charles Berger and 10-year-old William Murphy, so the kid had no snowshoes, turned back early on. Other members of the party fashioned a pair of snowshoes for 12-year-old Lemuel Murphy on the first evening from one of their pack saddles they were carrying. The snowshoes proved to be awkward but effective on the arduous climb. The members of the party were neither well-nourished nor accustomed to camping in snow 12 feet. And by the 3rd day, were mostly snowblind. Now, snow blindness happens when UVB rays go into the eye, and basically, if you stare at it too long, this is why sunglasses are important. You do need them, and they are a great modern convenience. Your eye, you can become permanently blind, especially in this type of temperature, because when the sun came up and you're they'll say keeping your head down because the snowflakes are flopping in your eyeballs, all you see is white and snow, and it just fucking blinds you. I remember this specifically from the time when we lived in Iceland, when the sun would come out and beam down on the snow, or even the Michigan winters I lived in growing up. I can remember being like, God damn, when the sun would come out. On the 6th day, Eddie discovered his wife had hidden a half pound of bear meat in his pack. The group set out again the morning of December 21st. Stanton had been straggling for several days and he remained behind, saying he would follow shortly. His remains were found at that location the following year. The group became lost and confused after 2 more days without food. Patrick Dolan proposed one of them should volunteer to die in order to feed the others. Oh, the Irishman. Hey, my name's Patrick Dolan. I've got an idea here. We can make a shepherd's pie out of the little one. Look, with a name like Patrick
That's
Dolan,
horrible.
hey, calm down.
Making shepherd's pie out of little Lemuel. Oh my God.
So
Where'd they get potatoes?
I'm just look.
I
Some of the
know,
best.
I'm just fucking with you.
But when I was in Dublin, Ireland's a beautiful country. You should definitely go and see. I did have myself a killer Guinness and a meal of shepherd's pie, and it was delicious. So
That's
shout
one of
out
my
to them.
favorite.
Me too. So they're already getting into this where they're like, man, I don't know about you, but some human jerky sounds good right about now. Some suggested a duel, while another account describes an attempt to create a lottery to choose a member to sacrifice. In fact, it was Patrick Dolan who drew the short stick on that one, and he was like, let's take a minute here, fellas. Let's not get irrational. Eddie suggested.
That sucks.
Well, he pulled that short stick after with the idea, and he's just like, this is look. Let's talk about a few other ideas. Hey, what about the guy who said something about a duel? I don't know. Eddie suggested they keep moving until someone simply fell, but a blizzard forced the group to halt. Antonio, the animal handler, was the first to die. Franklin Graves was the next casualty, which sucks. I mean, his daughters are with him and they have to watch him die. And full disclosure, he said, eat me so that you can survive. And
yeah,
that
was in the movie that I watched, the Donner Party movie. He said, yeah, I feel like, did he kill himself on purpose?
No.
No, in the movie, I think he killed himself on purpose. He stabbed himself in the heart or in the gut. It wasn't like what actually happened. It was just dramatic. I think in the movie he did off himself and then told his daughters to eat him.
Yeah, I mean, look, it sucks. But when they died, it really did become kind of like, the light is gone. What are we going to do with this? And this really comes to thing, I would do the same for my kids if I was in this predicament. I have no interest in eating human meat, and full disclosure, their two, Louis and Salvador, they sat away from the party when they did eventually begin to eat this meat. Eddie suggested that they keep moving until someone simply fell. As I said, Antonio, the animal handler, was the first to die. Franklin Graves was the next casualty. As the blizzard progressed, Dolan began to rant deliriously. This is Patrick Dolan, the Irish guy. Stripped off, and this is a case of hypothermia. In fact, during some of the most delirious moments of hypothermia, people's bodies will suddenly, it'll feel like you've just literally become like in a sauna. You're so hot. He stripped off his clothes and ran into the woods. He shortly returned and died a few hours later. Not long after, possibly because Murphy was near death, some of the group began to eat flesh from Dolan's body. Lemuel's sister tried to feed some to her brother, but he died shortly afterwards. Eddie, Salvador, and Louise refused to eat. The next morning, the group stripped the muscles and organs from the bodies of Antonio, Dolan, Graves, and Murphy. They dried them to store for the days ahead, taking care to ensure nobody would have to eat his or her relatives. And they did. They split it into groups, and they ate and they sobbed. They cried and they didn't look at each other, and they sat for a moment after their bodies regained consciousness, basically like a hard reboot on your PC. Like during starvation, you can actually lose that sense of hunger as your body is literally making adjustments to process what it has in it. And in this instance, as soon as they got that meat smell in their nose, they became just ravaged with hunger. And as they ate these people and this meat coursed into their body, and they got that full on just reboot 100%, not necessarily 100%, but you get what I mean. Like their body is like, oh shit, food. Yeah, we like this. They would eat again. And after 3 days rest, they set off again, searching for the trail. Eddie eventually succumbed to his hunger and ate human flesh, but that was soon gone. They began taking apart their snowshoes to eat the oxhide webbing, which again, that oxide webbing is like glue. So if you ever were that kid that liked to eat glue, I guess you'd be happy. And
Was it the Revolutionary War episode that we talked about eating your boots?
yeah,
That's basically what they're doing. Just eating your fucking boots, man. Eating your snowshoes, eating the oxhide. That's just like, how do they chew it and swallow it? It would take forever.
I remember as a kid like shoving a leaf in my mouth and trying to chew on it. I every time I think of eating things like shoes or whatever, I just imagine that and being like, bleh.
Yeah, it's just a horrible, horrible.
Yeah, you don't want to die this way, folks, or you don't want to be stuck in these predicaments. Jay Fostick died during the night, leaving only 7 members of the party, so Sarah's husband died. Eddie and Mary Graves left to hunt, but when they returned with deer meat, Fostick's body had already been cut apart for food. People were just like, they got that taste. And unfortunately, as we see when we get to the kids later on, that meat, that primal urge that these people were, I mean, meat was a primary resource of protein for this people, as it is today in some ways. But like, especially on the trail, you know, I think those hunger pains and that type of calorie burn that they were exerting themselves with during this travel, specifically, they needed their, maybe not necessarily needed, but their drive was, their hunger was for meat. And poor Sarah, I really feel for Sarah Graves. Her husband and her dad dies. People already eaten her dad, and when they asked if they could eat her husband Jay, they were like, well, or she specifically was like, well, it's not, nothing else is going to hurt him now. And they'd already cut him apart and made him into food. So after several more days, 25 since they left Truckee Lake, they came across Salvador and Luis, who had not eaten for about 9 days and were probably close to death. William Foster shot both men, thus realizing his plans from before they had left. Their bodies were then butchered and their flesh dried for consumption. So they were murdered. They murdered Luis and Salvador. Luis and Salvador said, hey, we're not part of this. We're not eating people. This is wrong. They split from the group, probably getting a sense of like, hey, I think these guys are really liking when they ate each other. Maybe we should get the fuck out of here, Luis. Yeah, I think you're right, Salvador. And they beat feet, and then they came upon him and fucking ate him. So as per the Halloween month, we're getting into the darker half here, especially with the eating of people and then the murder. Though the murder of the 2 young men was not kept secret, Kristen Johnson notes that Foster was not greatly blamed for it and spent the rest of his life without being troubled by the authorities. This can be attributed to the general attitude as expressed by Louis Penchuranoff that the lives of Native Americans seemed to matter little. And that's just terrible, folks. Not more than a few days later, the group stumbled into a Native American settlement looking so deteriorated that the camp's inhabitants initially fled. In fact, when they walked in, there were like little kids like looking at them, pointing and crying because they just looked disgusting. I mean, their clothes have survived the deserts, the salt, the mountains, the snow. They'd walk past a tree and part of their clothes would get ripped off. I mean, I remember reading a part of the book said one of them had used what little part of fabric they had and ripped it off to use as a bandage or maybe to eat their clothes. These people are malnourished. They're gross. They're burnt husks of people. And not only that, physical, but like I said before, the mental strain of having to eat your travel compatriots or know your family was ingested by people you were with. I can't imagine what that felt like. And when they got there, they just look like fucking zombies. I mean, think of Walking Dead. That's what I thought of in my head when I was in that area of the book, was just these just ramshackle, beat to hell people walking into this campsite. Not only that, the Native Americans gave them what they had to eat: acorns, grass, and pine nuts in a kind of like a paste. After a few days, Eddie continued on with the help of tribe members to a ranch in a small farming community at the edge of Sacramento Valley. A hurried assembled rescue party found the other 6 survivors on January 17th. Their journey from Truckee Lake took 33 days. I want to mention something. When those people got there, like I said, initially they had kind of split as they were doing their trail, because like, in a wagon train you'd have your wagon up ahead, or you'd have your people doing spot who would run up ahead or ride up ahead in their horse. In this instance, Eddie was the first person to get there. He had no shoes and he was trailing blood by every step, and that is in fact how the rest of the remaining members of the Forlorn Hope got to this Native American site, was they followed the trail of blood that Eddie left. And on top of that, these people, these Native Americans, were of the same tribe of Luis and Salvador. And they spent the night there with packs of their bodies stored with them. So not only were these Native Americans just being friendly to them, but they allowed these people who'd murdered their kin to stay with them in their packs, like hunks of them, like a hunk of their fucking chest meat just sitting in their backpack, which is just fucking disgusting. But it's true. So we're gonna get into the rescue now. James Reed made it out of the Sierra Nevada. In late October, he was safe and recovering at Sutter's Fort, but each day he became more concerned for the fate of his family and friends. He pleaded with the government to gather a team of men to cross the pass and help the party. In return, Reed promised to join Fremont's forces and fight in the war. He was joined by McCutcheon, who had been unable to return with Stanton, as well as some members of the Harlan Young party. The Harlan Young wagon train had arrived at Sutter's Fort on October 8th, the last to make it over the Sierra Nevada that season. The party of roughly 30 horses and a dozen men carried food supplies and expected to find the Donner Party on the western side of the mountain along the river below the steep approach. So there was this whole period here where it gets specifically really fucking brutal. For the winter at the time, I mean, you don't have a lot of ways for people to pass and to get back and forth, but everybody's kind of regained their composure. This was the first part in the book where I felt like I was finally breathing, because it was so fucking miserable the whole time. And I guess I don't know if you're like me when you're reading a book. It's like, can these people get a goddamn break? Even though I felt bad, like I felt, I don't know. This story is very gray. You know, there's few and far between heroes. I guess I would say Franklin Graves is a hero, and even James Reed, as shitty of a human as he was since he murdered that guy, he still came back. And but still, it is a relatively gray thing, um because, like, I mean, people weren't necessarily very friendly. I mean, to murder your trail guides. I understand the idea, but like, it's like, yeah, obviously, if we're gonna eat somebody, we're gonna eat a stranger and not family or friends we met along the way. But it's still fucked up, you know. It's like you feel bad too, because Lewis and Salvador were like, "Hey, man, you guys can eat each other, but we're staying out of it." And then they're like, you're looking like a pile of fucking nacho supreme over there, Lewis. Coming for you. I know it's bad.
Oh my God, you're all these food references. You're making shepherd's pie and nacho supreme. Fucking
Got to make a fourth meal run.
Lega Lemuel.
I know. I'm sorry.
Uh,
So I'm okay. So I said this, but I'm going to reiterate it because my computer was being stupid. So James Reed made it out of the Sierra Nevada to Rancho Johnson in late October. He was safe and recovering at Sutter's Fort, but each day became more concerned for the fate of his family and friends. He pleaded with Colonel John C. Fremont to gather a team of men to cross the pass and help the party. In return, Reed promised to join Fremont's forces and fight in the Mexican-American War. Future episode. He was joined by McCutcheon, who had been unable to return with Stanton, as well as some members of the Harlan Young party, that first party that left, the party that left on time, relatively. The Harlan Young wagon train had arrived at Sutter's Fort on October 8th, the last to make it over the Sierra Nevada that season. The party of roughly 30 horses and a dozen men carried food supplies and expected to find the Donner Party on the western side of the mountain along the Bear River, below the steep approach to Emigrant Gap. Perhaps starving but alive, when they arrived in the river valley, they found only a pioneer couple, migrants who had been separated from their company, who were near starvation. Two guides deserted Reed and McCutcheon with some of their horses. It's interesting because this, we talked about the forlorn hope and them arriving finally to the Maiutes and like getting kind of a reprieve. They, I didn't mention this as well, and this is in the book. The reason I said that they were able to find their way to where Eddie was because of the blood trail. But not only that, these people were prone to sobbing or moaning in the night in pain and their literal starvation and their mania. So they listened for that as well, because they could just hear like,
why? What the fuck? Why?
they were all like this, man, because they were, dude, this is like snow water torture constantly. Your cold is, I mean, look, I don't know about you, but part of me thinks Franklin Graves was probably like, this fucking sucks. And like literally looked up to the heavens, was like, beam me up, God, I am out. Like, take me out of this body because this shit blows. Like, it sucked. It sucked. Like, it sucked. But anyway, so two guides deserted Reed and McCutcheon because even these like relief parties, they had the same bullshit, this sucks ass, why the fuck are we in the worst winter of all time thing. Like, they get in the bar and then be like, let's do some shots, we're the rescue party, yeah. And then they would get like 2 minutes into their journey, or I'm sorry, 2 days into their journey, and just be like, I'm just saying, it sucked. It sucked. So the Reed and McCutcheon had the two deserters. They pressed on farther up the valley to Yuba Bottoms, walking the last mile on foot. Reed and McCutcheon stood looking up at Emigrant Camp, only 12 miles from the top, blocked by snow, possibly on the same day the Marines attempted to lead one last effort to crest the pass from the east. Despondent, they turned back to Sutter's Fort. The rescuers concealed the fate of the snowshoe party, informing the rescued migrants only that they did not return because they were frostbitten. So they fucking told a fib. Poor Lewis and Salvador. Patty and Tommy Reed were soon too weak to cross the snowdrifts, and no one was strong enough to carry them. Margaret Reed faced the agonizing predicament of accompanying her two older children to Bear Valley and watching her two frailest be taken back to Truckee Lake without a parent. She made rescuer Aquila Glover swear on his honor as a Mason that he would return for her children. Patty told her, quote, "Well, mother, if you never see me again, do the best you can." Upon their return to the lake, the Breens flatly refused them entry to their cabin, but after Glover left more food, the children were grudgingly admitted. You can't deny kids. Be a human.
Dude, I thinking about this whole fucking thing, I know we're real close to wrapping up, but like, you know, you have 3 children. I have my son, 6 years old. You know, I can't even imagine having my one child, let alone 3 or 6 or 8 fucking kids, like be in that sort of predicament. Like it literally, I mean, I don't know. As a parent, like it's just gotta suck so bad. Like I to see your children in any sort of, you know, bad situation, or, you know, where they could be harmed or, you know, threatened. Like I can't imagine. Like and you know, not to like break anybody's hearts, but a lot of kids died. A lot of fucking little kids died during this fucking whole ordeal. And it
Yeah.
sucks. It really does. It sucks a lot. During the rescue attempts, like a lot of them got rescued, but a lot of kids just didn't make it. And it's
Well,
fucking horrible.
yeah, and it was terrible for everybody involved, but specifically the PTSD for the kids that survived too, you know, or the people that survived afterwards, because when the press got a hold of this story, I mean, this thing ran and ran and ran, and you know, for simple folk sitting on their porch reading the newspaper or reading whatever news they got, this was fodder for some interesting stories, especially the cannibalism side of it. That's where it probably even extrapolated more, because people were so not fantasized. They were so like just shocked, you know? It was a crazy fucking story, but
yeah.
After several days more travel through difficult country, the rescuers grew very concerned that the children would not survive. Some of them ate the buckskin fringe from one of the rescuers' pants and the shoelaces of another. To the relief party's surprise, on their way down from the mountains, they met the next rescue party, which included James Reed. Upon hearing his voice, Margaret Reed sank into the snow, overwhelmed. After those rescued migrants made it safely into Bear Valley, William Hook, Jacob Donner's stepson, broke into food stores and fatally gorged himself. That's no joke. He died literally from eating. The others continued to Sutter's Fort, where Virginia Reed wrote, "I really thought I had stepped over into paradise." She was amused to note one of the young men asked her to marry him, although she was only 13 years old and recovering from starvation, but she turned him down. Around the time of the first relief party was being organized, nearby California settler and patriarch George C. Yount had likely previously heard of the plight of the Donner Party and in distressing dreams of a struggling group of starving pioneers in deep snow. Yount, Mariano Guadalupe Vallejo, and others then raised $500 to send out another rescue party. On March 1st, the second relief party arrived at Truckee Lake. Now, this is where the horror really, to me, the lingering and the nightmares of this story really hit. When they get to Truckee Lake, you got to keep in mind, this has been months. What was supposed to be a I don't know, 9-day trip over the mountain pass had turned into several months of eating roofs, had turned into overblown snowdrifts in a spot that was so densely packed with snow. They didn't even know they were there. Like they got to the destination and were like, this can't be it. And then all of a sudden you just see a weak old hand pop out of the snow. And their eyes, like they had been eating bones. They were on filth. Like this is the filthiest part of the story. Months of children who had just seen hell. So they comforted on the return with Reed and McCutcheon. Reed was reunited with his daughter Patty and his weakened son Tommy. An inspection of the Breen cabin found its occupants relatively well, but the Murphy cabin, according to author George R. Stewart, passed the limits of description and almost imagination. Lavina Murphy was caring for her 8-year-old son, Simon, and the 2 younger children of William, Eddie, and Foster. She had deteriorated mentally and was nearly blind. The children were listless and had not been cleaned in days. Louis Kesselberg had moved into the cabin and could barely move due to an injured leg. No one at Truckee Lake had died during the interim between the departure of the first and the arrival of the second relief party. Patrick Breen documented a disturbing visit in the last week of February from Miss Murphy, who said her family was considering eating Milt Elliott. Reed and McCutcheon found Elliott's mutilated body. The Alder Creek camp fared no better. The first 2 members of the relief party to reach it saw Trudeau carrying a human leg. When they made their presence known, he threw it into a hole in the snow that contained the mostly dismembered body of Jacob Donner. Inside the tent, Elizabeth Donner refused to eat, although her children were being nourished by their father's organs. The rescuers discovered 3 other bodies had already been consumed in the other tent. Tamsin Donner was well, but George was very ill because the infection had reached his shoulder. Remember that hand cut we talked about like an hour ago? Medicine, man. Thank God for medicine. We're doing just fine, folks. The second relief evacuated 17 migrants from Truckee Lake, only 3 of whom were adults. Both the Breen and the Graves families prepared to go. Only 5 people remained at Truckee Lake. Kesselberg, Miss Murphy and her son Simon, and the young Eddie and Foster children. Tamsin Donner elected to stay with her ailing husband after Reed informed her that a third relief party would arrive soon. Miss Donner kept her daughters Eliza, Georgia, and Frances with her. The walk back to Bear Valley was very slow. At one point, Reed sent 2 men ahead to retrieve the first cache of food, expecting the third relief, a small party led by Selim E. Woodworth, to come at any moment. A violent blizzard arose after they scaled the pass. 5-year-old Isaac Donner froze to death, and Reed nearly died. Mary Donner's feet were badly burned because there was so frostbitten that she did not realize she was sleeping with them in the fire. I see Adam's head just, man. There's even the story about that with one of the gentlemen on the forlorn party being so like just beaten by the weather and so just malnourished and shitty. His hand fell in the fire and like somebody was like, "Hey man, hand." And he's like, "Oh shit." Pulls his hand out and then it falls in again and they're just like, whatever. Maybe that helps. I don't know anymore. What is life?
I mean, you can't feel anything, and fucking your limbs are numb. They're in the fire.
Right.
I mean, honestly, might just start gnawing on my fingers. I don't know.
Well, most kids like to chew their nails. I mean, might as well just up the ante, right? Eat your fingers. So, like I said, Isaac Donner freezes to death. Reed nearly died. Mary Donner's feet were badly burned. When the storm passed, the Breen and Graves families were too apathetic and exhausted to get up and move. Not having eaten for days, the relief party had no choice but to leave without them. The site where the Breens and Graves had been left became known as Starved Camp. Margaret Breen reportedly took the initiative to try to keep the members of the camp alive after the others departed down the mountain. Soon, however, Elizabeth Graves and her son Franklin perished before the next rescue party could reach them, and the party resorted to eating flesh off the dead bodies in order to survive. There's a story about one of the kids eating a rat and literally just going crazy from it. Like he found a rat and he just literally picked the rat up, a live rat, and shoved it in his mouth and ate it. And then was like, and everybody who looked at him was just like,
You gotta fuck off with that thing.
I promise that was awesome.
No.
So William Foster and William Eddy, survivors of the snowshoe party, started from Bear Valley to intercept Reed, taking with them a man named John Stark. After a day, they met Reed helping his children struggle on toward Bear Valley, all frostbitten and bleeding but alive. Desperate to rescue their own children, Foster and Eddy persuaded 4 men with pleading and money to go to Truckee Lake with them. During their journey, they found the 11 survivors at Starved Camp, huddled around a fire that had sunken into a pit. And I think I mentioned this to you, the sunken pit area. 2 of the rescuers, hoping to save some of the survivors, each took a child and headed back to Bear Valley. John Stark refused to leave the others. He picked up 2 children. So this pit was so disgusting and depraved looking that some of them, when they arrived there at this pit that had formed, said, and after seeing the kids with these just like covered in gore and like little zombie kids, like think of a horror movie and think of scary kids. This is what you see. They were like, oh my God, put a cross in front of their face. Like, okay, let's just go. But effectively, basically they kind of split with them, and then they were like, Eddie's just like, no, fuck this, we're taking them. 2 of the rescuers, hoping to save some of the survivors, each took a child and head back to Bear Valley. It was John Stark who refused to leave the others. He picked up 2 children and all the provisions, assisted the remaining Breens and Graves to safety, sometimes advancing the children down the trail piecemeal, putting them down, and then going back to carry the other debilitated children. There was a third relief: Eliza Donner, Georgia Donner, Francis Donner, Simon Murphy, and John Baptiste Trudeau. Foster and Eddy finally arrived at Truckee Lake on March 14th, where they found their children dead. Kesselberg told Eddy that he had eaten the remains of Eddy's son. Eddy swore to murder Kesselberg if they ever met in California. Kesselberg would not live this down.
Yeah, I would probably do the same thing if I. Well, first of all, I would never leave my son behind. So if I came back and like found out like he's eaten, dude, yeah, it'd be. I wouldn't have promised to murder the guy. I would have fucking done it right there.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's just survival or not. Don't
eat my kid.
Don't eat my fucking kid, dude.
At the end of the day, there's the episode saying just don't eat your kid, don't eat my kid.
Don't eat your neighbor's kid. That should be an 11th commandment. Thou shalt not eat thy neighbor's kid.
And you know what? I could see that just making its way onto that list somehow back in that era. Anyway, George Donner and one of the Jacob Donner's children were still alive at Alder Creek. Tamsin Donner had just arrived at the Murphy cabin to see her daughters. She could have walked out alone, but chose to return to her husband, even though she was informed that no other relief party was likely to be coming soon. Foster and Eddy and the rest of the third relief left with the Donner girls, young Simon Murphy, Trudeau, and Clark. Lavina Murphy was too weak to leave, and Kesselberg refused. 2 more relief parties were mustered to evacuate any adults who might still be alive. Both turned back before getting to Bear Valley and no further attempts were made. On April 10th, almost a month since the third relief had left Truckee Lake, the let's see, what is this? The Alcalade near Sutter's Fort organized a salvage party to recover what they could of the Donner's belongings. Those would be sold, with part of the proceeds used to support the orphaned Donner children. The salvage party found the Alder Creek tents empty except for the body of George Donner, who had died only days earlier. On their way back to Truckee Lake, they found Louis Kesselberg alive. According to him, Miss Murphy had died a week after the departure of the third relief. Some weeks later, Tamsin Donner had arrived at his cabin on her way over the pass. Soaked and visibly upset, Kesselberg said he put a blanket around her and told her to start out in the morning, but she died during the night. The salvage party was suspicious of Kesselberg's story and found a pot full of human flesh in the cabin, along with George Donner's pistols, jewelry, and $250 in gold. They threatened to lynch Kesselberg, who confessed that he had cached $273 of the Donner's money at Tamsin's suggestion so that it could one day benefit her children. I call bullshit. News of the Donner Party's fate was spread eastward by Samuel Brennan, a journalist and elder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who ran into the salvage party as they came down from the pass with Kesselberg. Accounts of the ordeal first reached New York City in July of 1847. Reporting on the event across the U.S. was heavily influenced by the national enthusiasm for westward migration. In some papers, news of the tragedy was buried in small paragraphs despite the contemporary tendency to sensationalize stories. Several newspapers, including those in California, wrote about the cannibalism in graphic, exaggerated detail, which doesn't surprise me. I mean, we told you the facts today. A lot of this info came from the book. A lot of it came from the Wikipedias that kind of list the details so we could get the names right. And I mispronounce things on the regular, so sue me. But realistically, you didn't have to sensationalize this story. Between the fire pit, dead kids, the pot of George Donner's head that Kesselberg was keeping, the people just walking into the camp with Indians in their backpacks that they had just mutilated. This story's scary, disgusting, horrific, dark history of the highest order that didn't need to be sensationalized. The cannibalism already raises the bar to 10. Anything else is just trying to sell papers, which doesn't surprise me.
Dude, I feel like anything and everything that could have went wrong for these people went wrong. Like, from, sort of, I said earlier, the turning point was when they decided to take the Hastings cutoff, but from the get-go, like, it was just, they left late, and it was just, they hit the bad weather in Kansas, and it was just one thing after another. And after like the third or fourth thing, like, most people would have been like, yeah, let's, reconsider what we're doing. But now it was like 35 fucking things, and these people kept going.
Mm-hmm.
Like, dude, like,
I give them a B plus for effort.
I put a little list together.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you looked at my notes, but I put a little list, and we covered most of them, but it said things that went wrong during this fucked up trip.
Go ahead. I got a
So
little bit left and then we'll be done. So
they left too late. We covered that. They only packed enough food for 4 months. Obviously, this was way over 4 months. They trusted Hastings' guide too much. This whole cutoff that never been explored, never been traveled. We talked about how they kept adding people to their group, which meant, more resources were being, taken, eaten, whatever, consumed. The warning letters that didn't get delivered, the verbal warnings that they ignored, just, and once kind of, this is where it gets into the cutoff, is where, they start losing all the cattle, more and more people starting to die. They're running into the Paiute Indians that are raiding their camp, taking all their cattle, shooting them, stealing them. the blizzard trapping them. They're by this massive lake. They can't fish for shit.
Right. And they tried. That was in the book. They were like talking about how they literally could just stare at the fish, but they couldn't catch them. They're just
Yeah.
swimming by and they're just like, oh, boo.
Yeah, like, dude, everything that went wrong went wrong.
Totally.
And then of course, like the Forlorn Home crew, that just went to shit. Half of them died, half of them got eaten.
Mm-hmm.
Just everything that it could go wrong went wrong. But anyway, yeah, just had to throw that little list out there to sum
Oh,
it up.
I'm glad you did. Now, we talked about the Hastings cutoff. Lansford Hastings received death threats, rightfully so, for his role in the disaster. A migrant who crossed before the Donner Party confronted him about the difficulties they encounter reporting. Of course, he could say nothing, but that he was very sorry and that he meant well.
He went on to write another guide. I swear to God, I don't know if you read about it.
No.
So after this, later in the 1800s, like in the 60s and 70s, I think it went in, he lived about another 20 or 25 years, but he wrote a fucking, I don't know if it was called the Emigrant's Guide, but it was a guide to South America. So he went
Probably
down
hiding
south.
out.
Yeah, he went to South America or some shit and wrote another guide of like how to fucking get across the Amazon or some bullshit. Like, he never traveled it. He's just trying to sell these books. He's an idiot. That guy sucks.
Anyway, so we're going to talk about survivors. Of the 87 people who entered the Wasatch Mountains, only 48 survived. Only the Reed and Breen families remained intact. The children of Jacob Donner, George Donner, and Franklin Graves were orphaned. William Eddy was alone. Most of the Murphy family had died. Only 3 mules reached California. The remaining animals perished. Most of the Donner Party's members' possessions were discarded. A few of the widowed women remarried within months. Brides were scarce in California. The Reeds settled in San Jose, and 2 of the Donner children lived with them. Reed fared well in the California gold rush. So James Reed, him and his double carriage, he made off well. I mean, he served in the war. He came back. Again, I give him props for that. He's a guy that was in for the money. So obviously when the gold rush happened, he became a prospector in some regard. He became very prosperous. Virginia wrote an extensive letter to her cousin in Illinois, quote, about our troubles getting to California, with editorial oversight from her father. Journalist Edwin Bryant carried it back in June 1847, and it was printed in its entirety in the Illinois Journal on December 16th, 1847, with some editorial alterations. Virginia converted to Catholicism, fulfilling a promise she had made to herself while observing Patrick Breen pray in his cabin. The Murphy survivors settled in Marysville, California, while the Breens made their way to San Juan Bautista and operated an inn. They became the anonymous subjects of J. Ross Brown's story about his severe discomfort upon learning that he was staying with alleged cannibals. Printed in Harper's Magazine in 1862, many of the survivors encountered similar reactions. George and Tamsin Donner's children were taken in by an older couple near Sutter's Fort. Eliza was 3 years old during the winter of 1846 to 1847. The youngest of the Donner children, she published an account of the Donner Party in 1911, based on printed accounts and those of her sisters. The Breen's youngest daughter, Isabella, was 1 year old during the winter of 1846 to 1847, and the last survivor of the Donner Party. She died in San Francisco on March 25th, 1935. I'll now give you some friendly advice, she wrote. Stay at home. You're in a good place where, if sick, you are not in danger of starving to death. Mary Graves to Levi Fosdick, her sister Sarah Fosdick's father-in-law, 1847. Stay at home.
That's why I don't like to leave my house.
Schools canceled. Hey, snow days are great when you're a kid in the Midwest.
Oh my God.
And I think that wraps up the Donner Party. There's more information you can find, especially about, different stories. I highly recommend that Different Stars Above, Daniel James Brown's book. You can get it on Audible. It's a quick read. You can also see a little bit more of the wagon manifests. The details about frontier life are fascinating. As I said, the world is an interesting place, and the history of it only exemplifies more the journey that we've had in this country and around the world. Technology is a great thing, medicine's a great thing, and connecting is a good thing. And if you want to connect with us, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, recommend our podcast on Spotify. 5 stars will shout you out. Thank you to those who have reviewed. And thank you to my friend Danger Zone. Do you have anything going on you want to shout out?
No, I'm just curious what this El Nino is going to bring for us here in the snow belt
Oh
up
yeah.
in the well, you're in the Midwest, Northeast, so we'll see. Maybe we'll get some Sierra Nevada type snowfall this year. I doubt it, but
Fucking hope not. I don't want to have to go outside and turn my car on 20 minutes before I got to go to work.
we set a record high yesterday and a record high, close to a record high today, maybe. I don't know if we broke yet. I haven't seen the news, but fucking 89 degrees yesterday, 85 today, and then it is going straight to fall weather. And so we'll see. Snowfall is coming. Lake effect.
Not looking.
Nor'easters.
That's why we take a break in the wintertime for the show. But I'll get Adam back on here one more time in November. He came on here to grace us with his presence. I love you, man. But yeah, the Donner Party. It's interesting, sad. It's kind of rough. Not a lot to joke about, but we still did. And had an interesting conversation with my buddy again. But I love you, man. We'll do this again soon. Thanks for listening. Have a great one.
Oh man.